Nobody talks about what it costs to be the kind of person who stops. Not the headline, not the reward, not the Instagram caption that turns someone's worst night into your defining moment. Nobody talks about the weight of being built that way, the way it pulls at you even when every single thing in your body is begging you to keep walking. Miriam Adayeze Okiki had every reason in the world to keep walking. It was 12:58 in the morning, Seoul, in February. The rain was coming down in thick, unforgiving sheets, the kind that soaks through your jacket before you even register it's raining. Miriam had just finished a 13-hour shift at the care facility. Her feet were screaming. Her lower back had stopped making requests and moved straight to demands. She had left over a goosey stew sitting in her fridge, 47 unread messages she'd been avoiding since Monday, and a warm bed that had been waiting on her since 9 p.m. She was 20 steps from the train station entrance. She could see the platform light from where she was standing, and then she saw him, an old man, sitting completely alone on the bench outside the entrance, not sheltering under the overhang, not moving, sitting right in the middle of the downpour like the rain wasn't even happening, like he was somewhere else entirely, deep inside a memory that had nothing to do with this night, this bench, this cold. Here is what most people would have done. Here is what Miriam did. She stopped. She walked toward him. She crouched down into his level so she wasn't standing over him like a stranger deciding something about him. And because she stopped, because she chose that one moment over her warm bed and her unread messages, everything that happened next was set into motion, a dead woman's truth. A family's buried wound, and a man who hadn't let his walls down since he was 12 years old. Subscribe to Afro-Korean Chronicles right now. Because this story is only just beginning and you cannot afford to arrive late. The old man was completely drenched. His white shirt clung to his frame. His silver hair was plastered flat against his forehead. He sat with the stillness of someone who had surrendered to the weather some time ago, perhaps without even noticing it was happening. Miriam pressed her hand gently to his back. "Sir," she said softly, "are you all right?" He turned to look at her. His eyes were slow to focus. Not fearful, not hostile, just distant. The eyes of a man whose mind was living somewhere in a different decade, searching the present for familiar coordinates. He studied her face for a long moment. "She was supposed to come," he said finally. "Who was supposed to come?" Miriam asked. He looked back at the rain. "She always comes. Every single time, she always comes." He paused. "She didn't come tonight." Miriam didn't challenge him. She didn't explain that whoever he was waiting for was not arriving at 1 in the morning in a February storm. She simply stayed crouched beside him, present and unhurried, reading him the way she had learned to read people across years of working with those whose needs often outpaced their ability to name them. She noticed the phone peeking from his jacket pocket. She noticed the medical bracelet on his left wrist, a thin band with a number engraved in precise, small digits. "May I use your phone for just a moment?" she asked. He didn't respond. She read the silence as permission, withdrew the phone carefully, and dialed the number from the bracelet. It rang twice. A man answered. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice trained over time to give nothing away. "Yes." Miriam kept her own voice steady. "I found an elderly man outside Mapo station. He's sitting in the rain, completely soaked, and he won't move to shelter. I'm calling the emergency number on his medical bracelet. He needs someone here. Please come quickly." A pause, less than 3 seconds. "Which station?" Listen." She told him. "Don't let him leave. I'm coming." The line cut. Miriam tucked the phone back into the old man's pocket. She sat down beside him on the wet bench. She opened her small umbrella and held it over both of them, even though her jacket was already soaked through. The old man looked at the umbrella. He looked at her. He looked back at the rain. Something in his expression shifted. Just barely, just enough. "You'll get wet," he said. "I'm already wet," she said. He almost smiled. It was such a small thing. It was everything. They sat in silence while the rain came down and Miriam thought about her stew going cold and stayed on that bench anyway. 14 minutes later they arrived. Not one car. 3. Black, moving fast. Their headlights cutting hard through the rain in a formation that felt rehearsed. The kind of arrival that had clearly been executed before, on other nights, in other cities, with the same precise choreography. 6 men stepped out first. Dark clothing, immediate dispersal. Scanning the area with the quiet efficiency of people trained for exactly this, they moved without instruction. They checked angles. They communicated through looks rather than words. And then the rear door of the center vehicle opened. Jong Victor stepped out. He was tall, sharp-jawed, dressed entirely in black despite the hour. He moved toward the bench with the particular quality of a man who had never once in his adult life questioned whether he belonged in the room he was walking into. Not aggressive, not performative, just absolutely certain. The the kind of certainty that parted crowds without needing to ask. His eyes found the old man immediately. Something crossed his face, fast, real. Completely unguarded, before it was locked back down, behind the controlled expression, he clearly wore the way other men wore armor. He reached the bench in 3 strides. Abeoji. His voice was quiet. Let's go. I'm here. But the old man didn't reach for his son. He reached for Miriam. His hand closed around her wrist with a grip that surprised her. The grip of a man whose body still remembered what strength had felt like, even if everything else was less certain now. He looked at her with an expression that was not confused, not searching, complete, certain, recognized. Yunaya, he said softly, let's go home. You're going to catch a cold standing out here. The world went very quiet for 3 seconds. Miriam opened her mouth. I'm sorry. I'm not. One of the guards had materialized at Victor's shoulder. His voice was barely a breath. Sir, it's his late wife. Victor went completely still. He turned and looked at Miriam for the first time, not past her, not through her, but genuinely at her, past the wet umbrella, past the stranger on the bench, at her face. Miriam looked back at him, the old man's hand still wrapped around her wrist, the rain still loud between them. She didn't know who Yuna was. She didn't know who this man was, or what 3 black cars meant at 1 a.m, or why 6 trained men had appeared around a train station like they had been waiting for the call. She knew none of it, but she had spent enough years reading rooms to understand when something enormous had just shifted, and she was standing directly in the center of it. If your chest is tight right now, drop a comment below and tell me, because this story has barely opened its door. Subscribe to Afro-Korean Chronicles. You cannot afford to miss what's coming. Victor asked her to come with them. He didn't command. He didn't gesture toward the 6 men as a suggestion. He stood in the rain with water tracking down his jaw and asked her quietly, like the asking itself was costing him something he hadn't budgeted for. Just until he calms down, please. Miriam looked at the old man, Jang Chaol-woon, she would later learn, who was gazing at her with the absolute trust of someone who believed he had found exactly who he had been waiting for. She looked back at Victor. 1 word. Okay. She didn't know yet that 1 word was about to reorganize her entire life. The house didn't announce itself the way wealthy houses sometimes do. No gilded entry, no art selected for impressiveness, just space. Vast, unhurried, the specific weight of serious money that had been in one place long enough to stop needing to prove anything. Staff moved through it like a well-rehearsed current, each one precise, each one watching Miriam with the calibrated attention of people paid to notice everything. She poured tea for Chaol-woon and sat beside him and let him talk. He talked about a garden he tended for 30 years. He talked about a woman who made a pepper soup so specific in its layering that he'd never once succeeded in replicating it after she taught him. He talked about a son who used to follow him through the market as a small boy, gripping his hand with both of his, refusing to release even when Chaol-woon tried to shift a bag from one arm to the other. He talked about the sound rain made on a particular zinc roof in the house where he grew up. Miriam listened to every word. She did not redirect him. She did not check her phone. She did not give any indication that she was exhausted and soaked and sitting in a stranger's house at 2 a.m. because she had stopped to sit on a bench. She just listened. Because here is what she understood. Borrowed from years of sitting with people whose minds were releasing their grip on the present, when someone like Chaol-woon speaks, they are not speaking nonsense. They are speaking about the things that mattered most. The things the mind keeps holding when everything else starts to let go. The garden, the soup, the small boy who held on with both hands. These are not random. These are the load-bearing walls of a life. An hour later, Chaol-woon's eyes closed mid-sentence. Miriam sat still until his breathing deepened and steadied. Then she rose carefully, picked up her bag. He hasn't done that in 2 years. She turned. Victor was standing in the doorway. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his father with an expression she hadn't expected from the man who had stepped out of that car. Not power, not the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Something older, quieter, considerably more painful than either. Done what, miss? She asked. Fallen asleep without a fight. A pause. Since Yuna died, every single night is a battle. He gets agitated. He doesn't want to sleep. Sometimes he cries. He stopped, looked at the floor briefly. Tonight he just talked himself to sleep like a child. He hasn't done that since... He didn't finish the sentence. He thought you were someone safe, Miriam said. People sleep when they feel safe. It isn't complicated. Victor looked at her then. Full attention, the kind that lands on a person like something being aimed. You work in healthcare, he said. Not a question. I do. Is that why you stopped tonight? Professional instinct? She considered him carefully. I stopped because he was alone in the rain, she said. That's all. A silence settled between them. Long, not uncomfortable. Thank you, he said finally. The words moved through his mouth like something he didn't get a lot of practice with. Good night, she replied. She left. She drove home with her wet jacket leaving a damp patch on her car seat and thought about an old man who had held her wrist like she was something he'd been searching for. She thought about his son standing in a doorway, looking at his sleeping father with an expression that had no business being that unguarded on a face that controlled. She told herself she wouldn't go back. She lasted 3 days. Victor found her. She hadn't been surprised. He was the kind of man who located things when he decided to look for them. Not through aggression, but through the quiet, inevitable momentum of someone who had spent his life being the most prepared person in any given situation. He appeared outside her workplace with the contained certainty of a man who had already rehearsed how this would go. He offered her money. He was direct about it. Regular visits, compensation for her time. His father had been asking about her every morning. She refused so quickly, so cleanly, that she watched it visibly recalibrate something in his read of her. I'll come, she said, because he needs someone to sit with him, not because you're paying me. She watched something shift behind his eyes. He nodded once. Careful. Controlled. What she didn't see, because she had already turned to walk back inside, was the way he remained on that pavement for a beat longer than necessary, running her through every category he had for how people worked. He couldn't find one that fit her, and so the visits began. Every 2 to 3 days, Miriam came. Every single time, Khalawun looked at her and said, Yuna ya, with the absolute certainty of a man who had no doubt. Every single time, Miriam said gently, I'm Miriam. And every single time, he smiled with patient, fond amusement, the way you smile at someone you love for insisting on a technicality, and called her Yuna again. She stopped correcting him after the 3rd week, not because she was surrendering to his confusion, but because she had come to understand something important. He wasn't confused about her in the way that mattered. He knew she was safe. He knew she came back. In the part of him that still moved with complete clarity, he had already decided exactly who she was to him. Names were just names. Safety was not. Now, and this is where I need you to pay attention, because this is the moment that is going to split the comment section in half. Victor was cold to her, not threatening, not aggressive, but deliberately, consistently, almost architecturally cold. When their paths crossed in the house, he gave her the minimum. Clipped acknowledgments, brief responses, the particular politeness of someone who had decided to maintain a precise distance and was extremely practiced at holding it. He watched her with his father from hallways, from doorways, from angles she was clearly meant to notice. She was being observed. She was meant to know it. Oh, half of you watching this right now will say that's completely reasonable. He doesn't know her. She materialized at 1 a.m. She's in his home, in the space where his dead wife used to exist. His caution is protective. His coldness makes sense. The other half of you will say, this woman sat in the rain with his father, refused his money, and kept coming back out of genuine care. And he repaid that with arrogance dressed up as caution. Drop your take in the comments right now. I want to know which side you land on. Because Miriam had her own perspective. She didn't need his warmth. She wasn't there for him. She would do what she came to do, and his temperature was his own business. She didn't flinch. She didn't perform extra softness to counteract his coldness. She didn't make herself smaller. She walked into that house every visit with the same quiet steadiness with which she had crouched down beside a soaked old man on a bench in the rain, and that more than anything was quietly undoing him. Because every woman who had ever moved through Victor's world had adjusted to him, had calibrated herself to his temperature, had performed whatever was needed to occupy comfortable space near him. And here was this woman who simply did not do that, who moved through his house and listened to his father and drank her tea and went home and came back and did it again, who seemed to require absolutely nothing from him. He had no category for it. And the absence of a category was, for a man like Victor, deeply unsettling. 6 weeks in, Miriam stayed late. It started with the chess set. Khalawun produced it with the ceremony of a man issuing a formal challenge, setting the board between them with both hands, sitting back and studying her with the expression of someone who had already decided the outcome. Do you play? He asked. A little, she said. This was not entirely accurate. They played for 40 minutes. Khalawun played with the focused seriousness of someone who had spent 60 years taking chess personally. Miriam held her own considerably longer than he expected. She could see the surprise move across his face when she took his bishop. And then he dismantled her, methodically and completely, with the satisfaction of a man who had been waiting to do exactly this. You let me take the bishop, she said when it was done. I did not, he said serenely. You absolutely did. It was deliberate. Yuna used to accuse me of the same thing. He began resetting the pieces. I simply play better than people expect. It is not my fault. People underestimate me. Miriam laughed out loud. Another game, he said. Obviously. She lost the second one faster. He was delighted. When Victor passed the doorway and saw his father explaining to Miriam, in considerable detail exactly why her endgame strategy was structurally flawed and what she needed to study before she embarrassed herself further, and saw Miriam sitting with her chin in her hand, wearing the specific expression of someone receiving a comprehensive lecture and finding it entirely acceptable, he stopped in the doorway. He stood there for a moment longer than he realized. Then he moved on without saying anything. Something in him had shifted by a fraction he couldn't measure. Later, Chal Woon led her down the wide hallway to a painting on the eastern wall. He touched his frame with the careful reverence of something deeply significant. Yuna chose this one, he said. She stood in front of it for a very long time before she decided. It was a landscape, but it was utterly still. Rolling hills in deep green, a pale open sky, and in the lower right corner, the quiet suggestion of water. She had good taste, Miriam said. It looks like somewhere you'd want to have a picnic. Chal Woon smiled at it. She had very specific ideas about picnics. Victor appeared beside Miriam without warning. She registered his presence without turning. They both looked at the painting. There's a small gallery near Insadong, he said. His voice was directed at the painting, not at her. She spent 40 minutes in front of it before she decided. I timed it. I couldn't understand what she was seeing that was taking so long. What did she say when you asked her? She said I was looking at what was there. She was looking at what it made her feel. A pause. I didn't really understand that then. Do you now? He was quiet for a moment. Some things take time to understand. Miriam kept looking at the still green hills. The suggestion of water. Did you ever take her somewhere like this? A real picnic? The silence that followed had a weight. No, he said. There was always something more urgent. Miriam let that sit exactly as it was. She didn't fill it with comfort. She didn't fill it with judgment. She just let it be the thing it was. There's always something more urgent, she said finally. Until there isn't. She walked back toward the sitting room. Victor stood alone in that hallway and looked at a painting his dead wife had chosen and understood, perhaps for the first time, exactly what she had been looking at for 40 minutes. While all of this was unfolding, while Miriam listened to old stories and Victor quietly pulled his own walls apart, something else was in motion. Inside that house, someone had been watching Miriam with a completely different quality of attention. Not Victor's reluctant fascination, not the staff's careful curiosity, something colder. Something that calculated. Adrian Sonjai had been with Victor for 11 years. He was smooth, in the way that very dangerous things are sometimes smooth, with a pleasantness layered so completely over everything else that you had to study him carefully before you understood what that pleasantness was covering. His smile arrived faster than any genuine emotion could produce it. He deployed it constantly, reflexively, like a tool that had its own muscle memory. He watched Miriam's visits. He did not see a kind woman sitting with a lonely old man. He saw a foreign woman with unrestricted access to a house she had no business being in, daily proximity to Zhang Chalwun, hours alone with him. And whatever the old man said in his unguarded hours, whatever fragmented memories surfaced, whatever pieces of information his disintegrating mind released without choosing to, this woman was present to receive all of it. Reports began moving up a chain that did not include Victor. Meanwhile, Miriam was noticing things, not because she was looking, because she was present. Because she was the kind of woman who paid attention. A hallway near the east wing that staff navigated with a consistency that felt trained rather than habitual. Photographs on the shelves of the main sitting room turned face down, several of them, which could mean grief, but could also mean concealment. A door that was always locked in a house where every other room moved freely. She noticed all of it. She said nothing. She filed it in the quiet part of her mind that collected things without announcing them. Then one afternoon, Chal Woon had a clear moment. She had learned to recognize them. A quality of light returning to his eyes, a precision in his movements, a different texture to his silence before he spoke. He turned to her, and she could see him fully present, sharp, certain. Temporarily returned from wherever the fog took him. I want to ask you something, Sita, he said. Ask. Are you afraid of my son? She considered this honestly. No. He nodded slowly. Good. He's not frightening. He learned to look frightening because it was necessary. He folded his hands. His mother died when he was 12. He decided that day that he would never be unprepared for loss again. You cannot stay unprepared for loss and remain soft at the same time. So he chose. A pause. He made the wrong choice. But he was 12 years old, so I forgave him. Miriam sat with that. Then, can I ask you something? Yes. Who was Yuna? The window stayed open. He didn't drift. He looked at her with full, steady clarity, and what moved across his face was love, pure and sharp-edged and slightly painful, the way real love sometimes is when you're looking at it from the other side of loss. She was the best thing that walked into this family in my lifetime, he said. She saw my son clearly, all of him, the frightening parts and the 12-year-old underneath them, and she chose him anyway. His jaw tightened slightly. She found out the truth about what was happening inside the organization. She was trying to get to Victor to tell him. She was so close. Miriam's chest went very still. What happened? They got to her first, he said. His voice was perfectly flat. They called it an accident. It was not an accident. He reached beneath the cushion of his chair, the chair he always sat in, the one nearest the window, and withdrew a folded piece of paper and a photograph. He pressed both into Miriam's hands, with the deliberateness of someone who had been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. Keep these, he said. Don't show anyone in this house. When the time is right, you'll know. The window began to close. She could see it happening, the sharpness loosening at the edges, the distance beginning its return. She made very good soup, he said, softer now. You should ask her for the recipe sometime. Miriam sat with the paper and the photograph in her hands. And the stone weight of the word they sat in her chest. Not someone. They. She placed both items carefully in her bag. She did not look at them yet. Something told her the moment for looking had not arrived. She was right, and she was in far more danger than she knew. Cal Woon has been carrying this for 2 years, trying to push a message through a fog that keeps rolling back. Drop your prediction in the comments right now. Do you think Victor will believe her when she finally shows him what his father has been holding? Subscribe to Afro-Korean Chronicles. You cannot afford to miss what happens next. 3 days later, Adrian was waiting for her outside the house. He was leaning against the wall near the entrance, hands in his pockets, smile already assembled and ready. When he saw her approaching, he straightened with the easy warmth of a man who had prepared the next several minutes very carefully. Miss Miriam, he said, do you have a moment? You're already taking one, she said pleasantly. He laughed as if she'd said something charming. I wanted to personally express how much this family appreciates everything you've done for Chairman Zhang. Your patience, your generosity with your time. Truly. He paused, the smile held. But I've been thinking about you. Honestly, this environment can be very complicated. There are dynamics here that are difficult to understand from outside. For someone in your position, someone not from this world. Another pause. The longer you stay involved, the more complicated it becomes. It might be better, safer, truly, for you, to start thinking about wrapping things up. The chairman has excellent care here. You've done more than enough. Miriam looked at him. She looked at the smile. She looked at what was behind the smile and found exactly nothing, an absence so complete it presented as a wall painted to look like a room. Thank you for your concern, she said. She got in her car and drove directly to Victor. She sat across from him in his office and delivered it with complete precision. Every word, every pause, the smile, the specific warmth of the warning. She watched his face while she spoke, and he listened without moving. When she finished, he called Adrian in. Adrian arrived with his smile intact. He sat. He was smooth through the entire exchange, explaining gently that he had only been concerned for Miriam's comfort. A foreign woman in a complicated environment, he had simply wanted to be transparent with her about the landscape. Surely that was understandable. Victor looked at him for a long time. Don't approach her again without my knowledge, he said. Of course, boss, of course. I apologize if it came across badly. He left. The smile traveled down the hallway with him and around the corner. Miriam was in the hallway when Adrian passed her. He nodded politely. She nodded back. And she watched him walk away from the angle he couldn't see. His shoulders had not changed by a single degree. He was not recalibrated. He was not sorry. He had walked into that office, performed the required response, and walked back out completely unchanged. That told her everything. She went back to the sitting room. Kao Wun was napping. She sat in the quiet and thought carefully. When Victor appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, she looked up at him. He's not afraid of you, she said. Victor went still. What? Adrian, when you corrected him just now. She kept her voice even. A man who genuinely respects the authority of the person reprimanding him changes. Something in his posture changes. The pace he uses when he leaves the room changes. Something in him acknowledges the weight of the correction. She paused. He walked out of your office exactly the way he walked in. Victor stared at her. I'm telling you what I observed, she said. Do with it what you decide. The room was very quiet, and then Victor sat down. Not in a hallway, not in a doorway, not in the careful managed distance he had maintained for 6 weeks. He sat down across from her in the same room, and they looked at each other across the sleeping figure of his father. Who are you? He asked, not as a threat, as a genuine question. I'm the woman who sat in the rain with your father, she said. That's all. He shook his head. That's not all. She didn't answer. She looked at Child Wound sleeping in his chair and thought about a folded piece of paper in her bag that she still hadn't opened. That night, she nearly died. She was walking to her car after the visit. The street was quiet, well lit, completely ordinary. She had her keys in her hand and she was thinking about what she needed from the market. She heard the engine before she saw the car. Too fast. Coming from the left. Wrong speed for this road, wrong direction for this hour. She moved. The car missed her by less space than she wanted to calculate. She felt displaced air against her face, felt her own heartbeat in her teeth, felt her keys leave her hand and heard them hit the pavement somewhere in the blur of the next 2 seconds. She pressed herself against the wall, breathing. She stood there longer than she thought. When she finally looked at her hands, they weren't shaking. She wasn't sure if that meant she was brave or simply in shock. She decided it didn't matter right now. What mattered was the next step. She had always been good at finding the next step. The car didn't stop. It turned the corner and the street went back to being quiet and ordinary, as if nothing at all had happened. She stood against that wall for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her keys. And she drove, hands perfectly steady, to Jung Victor's house. She walked into his office without knocking. He looked up. He read her face in 1 second. He was around the desk in the next, hands on her shoulders, scanning her the way she had scanned Kyle Woon in the rain. Are you hurt? No, I moved fast enough. What happened? She told him. He listened, and the temperature of the room fell steadily with each sentence until, by the time she finished, his hands on her shoulders were very tight, and his jaw was set in a way that clearly meant something specific to anyone who knew him well. Miriam. He said her name with a weight she had never heard in it before. Victor. She looked at him directly. Sit down. I need to show you something. They sat at his desk. She reached into her bag and placed the folded paper and the photograph between them. Your father gave me these last week. He was completely clear when he gave them to me, clearer than I'd ever seen him. He said, don't show anyone in this house. She paused. I think you're the exception he meant. Victor looked at the photograph first. He turned it over. He read the back. She watched something move through him, something with no clean name, visible only in the specific quality of stillness that followed. He set the photograph down with extreme care and unfolded the letter. The office was absolutely silent. She watched him read. She was good at watching people. She had spent years in rooms where reading a face in real time was part of the work. She watched Victor read and she found the moment the words landed. Not at the beginning, somewhere in the middle. The moment his hands went still. The moment the controlled exterior found something it could not quite contain. He read it again from the beginning. When he looked up, his eyes were doing several things at once. She had never seen his eyes do several things at once. It's Yuna's handwriting, he said. She waited. She wrote this the night before she died. He placed the letter on the desk with the careful deliberateness of someone monitoring exactly what his hands were doing. She knew something was going to happen to her. She wrote everything she had found, every name, every account, every transaction. He stopped. And then Adrian. The name sat in the room like something that had been waiting a long time to be named. He's been dismantling everything from the inside for 3 years, Victor said. His voice was quiet in the way that is more frightening than any raised voice. Rerouting funds, building external alliances, using this organization as infrastructure for a takeover that was designed to happen slowly enough that by the time I saw it, there would be nothing left to recover. He looked at the letter. Yuna found the trail. She found all of it. She was trying to reach me, and he found out that she knew. He stopped. The pause was so long she could hear the entire house around them. That before she could get to me, he said, they called it an accident. I know, she said, your father told me. He looked at her sharply. He had a clear moment. He told me she found the truth and they couldn't let her live with it. She held his gaze. He's been trying to tell you, Victor. That's what he's been carrying. Every difficult night, every time he grabbed your arm and tried to say something, every time he got agitated and people around him decided he was too far gone to believe. She watched it land, the full weight of it. 2 years of his father trying to push a message through a fog that kept rolling back in. 2 years of careful, patient redirection from everyone who had decided the old man's mind couldn't be trusted. Victor put both hands flat on the desk. She knew who to trust, Miriam said quietly. She didn't give it to a lawyer. She didn't hide it in a safe. She gave it to the one person no one would search, the one person no one would think to look at. She glanced at the photograph. The back of the photo, what does it say? He turned it over, read it again. His jaw moved. "He will keep it safe," he said. He always kept everything safe. The silence that followed was the kind that only happens when something enormous has just been understood. She trusted him completely, Miriam said, and she was right. Victor was very still for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice had the texture of something that had been broken open. He tried to tell me. Every time I came to see him, he would hold my arm. He would start to say something, and He stopped. I would redirect him. I would be patient. The way you are patient with someone you've already decided isn't going to make sense. Another stop. I had decided before he even opened his mouth. You didn't know. He's my father. You didn't know, she said again. Not to excuse it, not to dismiss it, simply because it was the true thing. And she had learned that true things needed to be said clearly. He looked at her across the desk. In the space between them was everything that had been building since a rain-soaked bench at 1 a.m. Two people finding their way toward each other through the most complicated possible route. What do you need from me right now? She asked. Nothing. I need to handle this. I know I'm asking about right now. This moment, before you go handle it. He looked at her. Something in him was working very hard to hold itself together. Stay, he said. Just for tonight. Don't go back to your apartment tonight. Okay. It was the second time she had agreed to something simple that was not simple at all. This moment right here. Drop a comment on Afro-Korean Chronicles and tell me what you think. A man asking a woman to stay just for tonight. What does that mean to you? What should it mean? The comment section is yours. What happened over the next 72 hours is the kind of thing that happens in the dark and does not require bright light to be understood. Adrian Seonjae was brought to account with the particular thoroughness of a man who had just learned that the person responsible for his wife's death had been seated at his table for 2 years. The network Adrian had built was dismantled from the inside, the way networks built on betrayal always are, from the points where it was weakest, which turned out to be everywhere. The people who had chosen his side found the weight of that choice arriving for them swiftly and without ceremony. Victor moved through those 72 hours as a man who had been given something back. Not Yuna. She was not given back. She never would be. But the truth of her, the truth about what had happened to her. The ability to receive his father's 2 years of anguish as the thing it actually was. A man trying to deliver the most important message of his life through a fog that kept rolling back in, that was given back. Miriam stayed in a safe house she had never seen before. Quiet, comfortable, ordinary, in exactly the way she was grateful for. 2 guards outside who left her completely alone. She read. She called her mother and did not explain where she was or why, because her mother was a woman who worried with her entire body, and there was no need for that. She sat by the window in the early mornings and watched the street come alive and thought about the direction of her life. She had come to Korea on a 2-year contract. The contract was ending. Her departure had been planned for months. Her boxes were half packed. Her goodbyes at work were already in motion. She had a life to return to. A good life. A chosen life. A life that fit her. She sat by that window and thought about an old man who had said her actual name in a garden, clear as water, before the fog came back. She thought about good things are coming, and she wondered if she had walked toward them, or if they had been arranged for her long before she made any choices at all. On the 3rd day, Victor came to the safe house. He looked like a man who had not slept and was not going to discuss it. He sat across from her and told her it was done. She nodded. I want to offer you something, he said. Don't, she said. He looked at her. You haven't heard what it is. It's money or protection or a house and soul or some combination of the 3, she said. I don't want any of it. Then what do you want? She didn't hesitate. She had known the answer to this question for weeks. Make sure he's never alone in the rain again. Something happened in his face that was too private to look at directly. She looked at her hands and gave him a moment. That I can promise, he said. That one I can promise with my whole life. She nodded once and looked back up at him. They sat in the quiet of the safe house and looked at each other, and there was nothing left to perform between them. No coldness, no managed distance, no careful positioning. Just 2 people who had arrived at a moment of complete honesty through a route that neither of them would have chosen, and who were both, obscurely, grateful for it. You're leaving, he said. My contract ends, she said. I was always leaving. I knew that from the beginning. I know. He looked at his hands briefly. I think that's part of why He stopped. Part of why you kept your distance. Yes. That, she said, is the saddest reason for distance I've ever heard. He was quiet. Then, are you telling me it was avoidable? She looked at him steadily. I'm telling you it was a choice. He sat with that. My life is not a simple life, he said. If you stayed, if you came back, there are things that would not be simple. I know what your life is, she said. I've been inside it. She stood and picked up her bag. And my answer to the question you haven't asked yet is that I don't know. I need to go home first. I need to stand in my own life for a while and find out what I find. She looked at him. But I'm not running. I want you to know the difference. He stood. He walked her to the door of the safe house, and they stood there in the ordinary afternoon light, with nothing between them. Go, he said, and come back. I make no promises, she said. I know, he said. That's why I'm asking. She went to say goodbye to Kyle Woon the following morning. He was in the garden, seated in a chair someone had placed in the exact patch of morning sun he preferred. He was talking quietly to the plants with the comfortable authority of a man engaged in a long-standing conversation that he considered entirely reasonable. He looked up when she came through the garden door, and his whole face opened the way it always did. Yunaya, he said. Come sit. The tomatoes are being difficult again. She sat beside him and let him talk. She let him tell her about the tomatoes. She let him tell her about the trip with the very blue water, the story growing slightly longer than the last time she'd heard it. She let him tell her about the small boy who held on with both hands, refusing to let go even when it was inconvenient. She was preparing herself to say goodbye when Chao Woon reached over and took her hand. He held it for a moment, and then the window opened. She could see it. The light returning, the precision arriving, the fog pulling back just enough. He looked at her and said clearly, without any confusion at all, Miriam. She went completely still. But he smiled, full and warm and entirely present. Good things are coming, he said. I want you to know I'm certain of that. Are you? She said. I am. He patted her hand. My son is a good man. He just forgot how to show it for a while. Don't give up on him too quickly. I'm not giving up on anything, she said. He nodded, satisfied. And then the window closed and his eyes went soft, and he turned back to the tomatoes and said, Yunaya, do you think they need more water? Probably, she said. She fed him breakfast. She stayed an extra 2 hours. She watered the tomatoes with him. When she finally stood to leave, he held her hand for just a moment and then released it with the gentle certainty of someone who knows a thing is not ending. She walked out of that garden and through the house and got into her car and drove 2 streets away and parked and sat with her forehead against the steering wheel for 5 full minutes before she started the engine. The airport was full and loud and indifferently busy the way airports always are. She checked in. She cleared security. She found her gate and bought bad coffee and stood at the departures board and thought about all the times in her life she had made a decision by moving towards something and not looking back. She heard the footsteps behind her and knew them before she turned. Jang Victor. No guards, no cars, no production. Just a man in a coat slightly too light for the weather, standing in an airport, looking at her with an expression that was not asking her to stay. You said you weren't here to stop me, she said. I'm not. He crossed the space between them and reached into his inner pocket and held out a small envelope. She took it. His fingers brushed hers. Neither of them commented on it. My father had a very clear morning yesterday, clearest in months. He talked for almost an hour. A pause. He told me things about Yuna I didn't know. A thing she'd shared with him near the end. He had been holding all of it. Another pause. He said he was glad it was you. That Yuna would have known to pick someone stubborn enough to sit in the rain. Miriam pressed her lips together. He also said to tell you that good things are still coming. He was very emphatic about the emphatic part. He made sure I understood the emphatic part needed to land. She looked at the envelope in her hands. Victor. Yes. Say the thing you came to say. He exhaled. A man who had controlled rooms, who had controlled organizations, who had controlled the expression on his own face since he was 12 years old, stood in an airport departures hall and said with absolute simplicity, I don't want you to go. I know, she said. That's all you're giving me? I told you I make no promises. Here is where Afro-Korean Chronicles needs you to drop a comment right now. Half of you think she was being unfair. That this man showed up without his armor, without a single guard, without anything but honesty, and she gave him almost nothing back. That after everything, she owed him at least one open door. The other half think she was right. That a woman does not owe a man warmth simply because he finally chose vulnerability. That her restraint was self-possession, not cruelty. That she had already given this family more than anyone had asked her to. Which half are you in? I need to know. Drop it in the Afro-Korean Chronicles comments. You also told me you weren't running, he said. He looked at her. I'm holding on to that. You should, she said. The boarding announcement came over the speakers. She looked at the gate. She looked at him. He wasn't asking her to stay. He was simply making certain she knew that he wanted her to. She rose on her toes and pressed a brief, light kiss to his jaw, felt him go completely still, stepped back and picked up her bag. Make sure he eats breakfast, she said. He tries to skip it. I know, he said. He told me this morning. He also said you cheated at chess. I did not cheat. He is genuinely exceptional at chess. He says you moved his piece when he wasn't watching. I would never. Victor almost smiled, the almost smile that had been becoming gradually more actual across the past weeks. She turned and walked toward the gate. She did not look back. Some decisions require a specific direction of travel, and looking back is not part of it. She found her seat. She waited until the plane was climbing and the city was falling away beneath her in its neat, organized lines before she opened the envelope. Inside was the photograph, Yuna and Chao Wun, both laughing at something beyond the edge of the frame. Pure unguarded joy, captured in 1 second and held there forever. On the back, in Yuna's handwriting, he will keep it safe. He always kept everything safe. Below that, in shakier letters, written with the specific, careful effort of a man fighting to make his hands do what his mind needed them to do, thank you for sitting in the rain with me. And below that, one more line, slightly uneven, full of love. My son is afraid of goodbyes. Be patient with him. Miriam pressed the photograph to her chest, and she cried. She cried the way she had not cried once through all of it. Not in the rain, not when the car nearly hit her, not reading Yuna's letter over Victor's shoulder, not in the garden when Kalawun said her name with perfect, startling clarity. She cried now, at altitude, with bad airline coffee going cold beside her, properly and completely, and without holding a single thing back. Then she wiped her face. She looked at the photograph again. She read every word on the back, one more time. Her phone buzzed before the signal dropped entirely. Unknown number. He had eggs this morning. 2 of them. He complained about them extensively. I believe this is a sign that he enjoyed them. She typed back through tears that were mostly finished now. Good. Make sure he goes outside in the morning. He likes the sun on the left side of the garden. The tomatoes also need attention. A pause. I know. He told me. He also said Yuna used to sing to them and that I should consider it. She laughed out loud. The passenger beside her glanced over. She didn't care even slightly. She typed, he's not wrong. Plants respond to sound. Victor, I am not singing to tomatoes. Miriam, you don't have to, but don't come back to me when they underperform. A longer pause, then, come back when you're ready. No pressure, no timeline. Just come back when you're ready. She looked at the message until the signal dropped and the screen went to airplane mode and the city was entirely gone beneath the clouds. She held the photograph. She thought about an old man in the rain who had reached for her wrist like she was someone he'd been searching for. She thought about a son who had stood in a doorway, looking at his sleeping father, with an expression that had no business being that unguarded. She thought about a woman named Yuna who had trusted a man with dementia to hold the most important truth she had ever found, because she knew absolutely that he would keep it safe. She thought about good things are coming. She thought that maybe Kalawun had been right in the way that mattered most. Not about her name, not about who she was, but about the fact that she was someone who came back, someone who sat in the rain, someone safe. She thought maybe she had been all of these things for longer than she knew, and that this family had simply been the place where every part of it was finally completely needed. She would go home. She would stand in her own life. She would breathe and remember and decide. And then when she was ready, she would come back. Some people walked past. Miriam stopped. And because she stopped, an old man made it home safely. A dead woman's truth finally reached the person it was always meant for. And a man who had been afraid of goodbyes since he was 12 years old stood in an airport and said the only honest thing he had left. If this story found something in you, you already know why. Drop a comment right now on Afro-Korean Chronicles. Tell me what hit you hardest. Tell me whether you think she goes back. Tell me whether Victor deserved her patience, or whether she gave too much to a man who gave her coldness for weeks. This comment section belongs to you, and I want to read every word. Share this with someone who needs it today. Like this video so more people find this story. And subscribe to Afro-Korean Chronicles, because the next story is already waiting, and it will find you at exactly the right moment. Some people walk past. Be the kind who stops.